It's not officially styled, but next time hopefully I'll have it styled for you. Yay, we're still here. Okay, good.
Right. Hi, everyone.
So, Sally, do you want to kick off the meeting and then I'll start with the.
Yeah, sure. So I just want to, I don't have my words out because we had a little bit of a flurry of getting in and getting kicked out. So thank you to everyone for persevering. And I see a lot of familiar names here today, including somebody I know from Australia who's come in. So hi, Val. Nice to see you here. One thing that we like to do that's quite fun, if anyone is interested, is to rename ourselves so we can see where we're from. And that can be fun. And how we do that is if you just click on your own photograph and look at the three little dots at the top, it'll give you an option to rename yourself. So I'm going to do that right now for Australia. But there's no obligation to do that if you're not comfortable with that. And we'll just start. I'll just start by acknowledging the Indigenous owners of the lands that we all stand on and pay our respects to them. That is something that we value very much here as Book Club. And I'm excited to tell you that we have in our 2025 books, which I'll drop a link to in the chat, our very next book in early 2025 is written by an Indigenous Australian. So I'll put that in the chat. And if you'd like to have a look at our upcoming books, we have streamlined the registration. So when you
Good.
click on register, you can actually choose to register either for just an individual session or for the whole year at once. So hopefully that'll be easier for everyone. So welcome. So I'll pass over to Wendy to chat about the book.
Sure. Okay, so a couple of things I want to just tell you about. Kate Forsyth is a prolific writer. If you've read this, you may have read something else by her. But a couple of points that I found very interesting. First of all, as you may know, she's Australian, but she grew up with a stutter. And I thought that was interesting considering that one of our main characters has a stutter in this book. So she's, you know, I think the authenticity of the stutter that she uses is very interesting. A couple of things about her. I'm going to read a quote that she says. It said, "It doesn't matter what is happening to you in your own life, whether you're sick or sad or lonely. Books are a magical getaway to other worlds and other times. For a while, you walk around in someone else's shoes and you travel their journey of discovery with them. When you come back to your own body, in your own place and time, you have changed, you have grown." I thought that was a really interesting.
That's really good.
Yeah. To me, I think that's been my one of my joys of reading ever since I was a young child is that escape and going someplace new and learning about new people and new places.
Mhm.
Now, this particular book was inspired because her grandfather once told her that her great uncle had similarly escaped the Nazis through the White Mountains of Crete.
Mm.
He managed to reach a tiny stony beach on the far side of the mountains, hiding in a cave to escape the Germans who were hot on their heels. Her great uncle managed to get away. The British warships were sent from Egypt to evacuate the Anzac soldiers. So I thought that was very interesting because it's the fact that her this great uncle lived in the caves, went over the mountains, was escaped by one of those ships that was picking up the Anzac soldiers. Um, that really got her interested. That story got her interested in the whole thing about what happened
Hmm.
during the war in Crete. So, um, yeah, on to some questions. We'll go right into some questions. I let's see, where is it? The story is set in Crete. Who of you have ever traveled to Crete? And did you feel any kind of familiarity when you saw the travels in the book?
Not really.
Not really?
Susan, which parts of Crete did you travel in?
We were in the south,
Mm-hmm.
and it
Yeah,
was
because
a
I've
while back, so maybe things changed.
And Peggy, you said you've been to Crete as well?
I was there for my honeymoon, and we hiked the Samarian Gorge. So parts of it were familiar, the little villages type things, areas. Um, but I'm and that also was a long time ago, so I probably don't remember it as fondly as I should.
I was in Crete last year, and I thought it was very familiar, but travel is such a personal experience and such a subjective experience that our different takes on places could be different. But I found particularly the descriptions of Heraklion, the capital, I found very apt, and I guess that was because I had so recently, when I read the book, I had so recently walked up the same road, from the port, and I stopped and looked at the same landmarks that the protagonist, that Jack mentions. So for me, that part of the book did feel very familiar.
I also remembered the ruins at Knossos and how amazing they were, just unbelievable. And when they mentioned, the friezes or the pictures on the walls, I remembered those. Yes. They were just amazing.
I was explaining to Sally before we got cut off and then come back in. I've never been to Crete, but when I lived in Germany in the mid 70s, my husband used to go to Crete on a regular basis for work. And he would come back with such wonderful stories. And it's been on my bucket list ever since then. But I'm sure that what he was seeing in the mid 70s is very different than today.
Yeah.
Because they were still staying in little tiny villages where people would get out on the seacoast and build the big bonfires and sing and dance on the shores. And that to me has always been Crete. It's that fairy tale place. So this was just another one of those things that I want to go. So let's see. All right, the first question about any favorite passages that people had. We usually have at least one person with a favorite passage.
Mary's got a hand up.
Yeah,
Mary?
I'll limit it to one. I have actually had three, but one that I liked, it said she was writing, here in Crete, the women do the work. Olenka said, if you offer to carry her buckets for her, everyone will know you are not Cretan. And the reason I love that is because every place around the world is like that. It's like we have these local nuances that we do, and whether it's cultural or just local. And so I just, that just jumped out at me, because I thought that's kind of what travel is about, isn't it? That we're just learning how the world is so much alike, or so much the same, but so much different.
Good. Yeah, Peggy.
So one of my favorite parts was when Jack is talking to, and I think his name was Reg, who is an Aborigine from Australia. And my thinking was, there has to be a war for him to talk to him, It just, struck me that, war, the upside of war is you meet new people. I mean, but he probably wouldn't know this person from Australia, being from two different cultures,
Reg Saunders is actually a real historical character.
Oh, wow.
He was the first Aboriginal soldier in World War II to become an officer, which I think happened after the events of this book. And he, like all of our Aboriginal soldiers, when they came back to Australia, had went back into the same oppressive situation that they'd left. So a lot of the, everything from the veterans compensation to, democratic rights, all of those kinds of things, when they came back from the war, were in a position that was significantly worse than the white soldiers they'd fought with.
Terrible.
So
But
he
that's the
he is a very interesting historical character.
Yeah, and that's very unfortunate. It's a similar story here in the U.S. where the African Americans and the Native Americans did not get the same treatment after they'd been in the war. So,
Yeah. It's
um,
actually interesting. She has a lot of real historical characters in her
yeah,
books, including a lot of people who've written books themselves, like Patrick Leigh Fermor. And it is quite interesting to see which, I mean, I'm sure there were some historical characters that I didn't recognize, but it raises all sorts of interesting things about how you write about real people and how you put words into the mouths of real people. I've heard her speak about it on a podcast. There's a podcast called Uzo Talk, which is a Greek Australian podcast, and she was interviewed on there, and it was very interesting.
Jan, did you have something?
Oh, there was just one short little piece that I don't know, I kind of noticed when Alenka and Jack are talking and he's admiring her embroidery. And she says, in Greece, the color red is very important. It's the color of life and blood and passion and magic. When you say touch wood, we say grab red. It just it was interesting to me. And the whole book was interesting because I knew almost nothing about Crete. And so I really enjoyed it.
Now, the characters in the book, especially Alenka and her grandmother, they were talismans, um, including the Mate and the Evil Eye, red and white thread, as you talked about, bracelets, coins, and Christian crosses. Do you wear an item for luck, protection, or because it symbolizes something significant to you? And is it from your own country or from some place where you had traveled?
Linda?
Linda.
Yeah, I don't wear anything, but I have a few items that I tend to always have with me. And in my wallet, for example, I have a holy card from the Basilica in Washington, D.C. that I got when I was a kid back there with the family on vacation, and it has been in my wallet ever since. And it's kind of sad and folded up, and you can't really unfold it for fear it'll rip. But I have a few of those kind of odd things tucked in various places.
I've been known to.
I had a pendant, which I don't wear anymore. I had a pendant of, I don't know if any of you have seen the Nazca lines in Peru.
Oh, no.
They're these incredible prehistoric designs on the desert floor, and they, kind of kilometers big, and they are of geometric designs, but also of animals. And I was lucky enough to fly over them to see them. And I was with the big love of my life back then, who is no longer the big love of my life. And he bought me a little pendant, which was of this monkey that is on the desert floor. And I wore it for a long time, and I actually now have a tattoo of that. But the interesting thing for me was when I got the tattoo, for years, I wanted to get that tattoo, but I didn't want to kind of hook myself up with this guy who had dumped me, basically, who I was still so in love with for years and years and years. When I got the tattoo, it was when I was over him. That was when I was celebrated. And getting the tattoo, instead of it being a commemorating him, was actually, it was a symbol of the fact that I was now over him, and I didn't need to worry about that anymore.
Good. Okay, let's get into some of the characters in the book. What do you think of Axel? That's Alenka's little brother at the beginning of the story. And did you feel any sympathy for him? And what about as the novel progressed? What do you think drove his actions?
How do I do this?
Yeah, Elena.
Am I muted? I'm doing this on my phone, so I'm not used to.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Great. Well, I think he is an example of personality development when a person is unloved from the beginning of their life. And I think that was his problem, because we don't find out until later that his mother, who has been mute all this time, admits to her daughter that she was forced. So if he were born of rape and he was so different from everybody else in the community, obviously he had been pointed out and made fun of, etc. And in fact, his mother was thrown out of her marriage, and she and her daughter and her son had to go live with the grandmother, etc. So her whole life was totally ruined because this baby was born, and he felt unloved from day one. So he was seeking identity with the Germans. Now, unfortunately, he went all the way and did not acknowledge any of their atrocities or brutalities. And unfortunately, I think that's the same thing that happens to young men who join gangs or something. That's their identity, to be in that gang. And so they do whatever they need to do to be accepted.
Now, I know that I, for example, at the very beginning of the book, felt sorry for him. That with this poor little boy, he really just wants to belong somewhere, and this idea of this exciting father out there somewhere, but then it just got so dragged downhill. I mean, it's too much, way too much. Any other thoughts on Axel? Okay, so now we'll talk a little about Jack. Jack was one of my favorite characters. Um, and the way how did the way that Jack engaged with the landscape and the people of Crete contrast with Teddy's relationship with the Cretans and their island? How do you think the two men, how did they react to the island and the island people?
I think Teddy was 18.
Yeah.
And everything that an 18-year-old male is. He felt entitled. He felt, I'm going to get what I can. He was very 18. Whereas Jack, I'm wondering, because of his stutter, had grown up faster and sort of realized what was important in life and connecting. That's the way I felt about the two of them.
That's the way Jack engaged with the landscape and the stories of the landscape. Like, you feel like from the very moment that he sets foot there, like he's actually reveling in being in Greece and being in this country that he's learned about. And funny, I hadn't actually thought about the ages. I should have. I actually pictured them as being a little older than 18. But you know what? Even if they were older than 18, you're right, Peggy. Teddy was still acting like an 18-year-old. And Teddy, he hates the mountains, and he's got no interest in the heritage, and he's like quite contemptuous towards the people. I mean, this is before we even get into quite awful things that he does later on in the book. And it was very interesting to have that those two were best friends, because that's kind of the mystery, isn't it? Like how you have good men enabling bad men, how that happens, and you get this kind of solidarity between friends even when they have completely different values. Dina? You're on mute, Dina?
You're on mute.
There we go. Okay. Teddy was quite similar in his upbringing too, his situation, it seems like, to Axel. I thought both of them were in kind of abusive and unloved situations. And so you've at first you kind of saw where he was coming from, but he never, he, like Axel, he never grew. He never um, connected inside with other people, and so he just stayed in that angry, um, you know, just self-centered mode, and he never, in spite of all the attention and kindness of Jack, he never grew out of that. He never, and he just, like Axel, he just progressed. And Jack had a very loving, although he had been abandoned, he had that grandmother. He had that close. He had a loving family, even though it was, not maybe traditional or all, but and yeah. So I think I thought I saw Teddy and Axel on the same kind of a path.
Interesting.
Anyone else have any thoughts on that? Okay. The core of the novel is set at the archaeological site of Kosnos and the nearby villa, I'm not sure how to say this,
Ariadne?
which is the key for some of the most daring exploits during the war in Crete. Did you know that some of the characters were real life resistant fighters, like Patrick Leigh Fermor, George Psycho? I cannot pronounce this guy's name. Psychoandicus. And others.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to pronounce it either.
They went on to write memoirs. They went on to write memoirs of their own, and in fact, Kate Forsyth said that she used a lot of memoirs to be able to get to pull some information. A lot of her research took her 3 years to research it, but she pulled a lot from memoirs and books that other people had written to get some of the background.
Yeah. Wow.
How do you think including these actual historical authors may have changed how she wrote the book?
Well, I think if you have a better understanding what took place based on the people who were there, you can make the story both more realistic, but also more gripping, because you do have facts that you can base the storyline in beyond just, a history book kind of thing. So I think it helps flesh out the story just to make it more engrossing.
And I think one of the things she talked about is how it may, there was an actual figure. If she was looking at their writings and their journals, etc., she could find out more information about what were the feels and the smells and what were people living like and cooking like to make it more realistic.
I heard something quite interesting in one of her interviews. She didn't only read the memoirs of the English soldiers and the Greek soldiers. She also read memoirs from German soldiers that were there. And the one of the, like a lot of the sort of the anecdotes and the kind of little touches of color and stories come from these. Of course, what she did say is that these were overwhelmingly the male perspectives of what happened. She had to actually go to Crete and talk to people and find out their grandmother's stories to find out the women's side of what happened. But the story of the church, the cathedral in Heraklion, that the Germans couldn't bomb because every time they flew over and tried to bomb the I don't know what you call them, the bomb doors or whatever it is that open for the bombs to fall out with sand, and that they tried 3 times or something and then gave up doing that came from a memoir of a German Air Force.
Wow.
Interesting.
So that was interesting because, you sort of think of these things coming, sort of almost becoming part of the folklore of the people who lived there. But she found out as much as she could, written wherever she could, to try and get these little angles into the story.
One of the things that because Jack and Teddy are from Australia, that creates an interesting conflict with Alenka, who she thought that all of Australia was going to be dry desert land. And when Teddy told her about the snowy mountain region, she was completely surprised. Have you ever been really surprised by the landscape and the climate of a country you visited?
Hmm.
Yeah, Elena.
Oh, do you mean me?
Yeah.
Well, I live in Mexico about half the time. And yes, I have been surprised because I don't think we realize how many climate zones are in Mexico. And I was in San Miguel de Allende in March once, and it hailed. So, I mean, it's high mountains, it's very dry. It's like a high desert almost, and to have it hail there was more than surprising. So I don't think most people realize that besides deserts and beach towns, that Mexico also has so many mountains and canyons and areas that are really lush and green, especially if you go down toward Oaxaca, for example. So,
Yeah,
Morocco. I think when people ask me what's one of the most interesting places I've been, I usually say that. Not that it was my only favorite place, but just because it just astonished me to go from mountains and to deserts to little port fishing villages to deep gorges with wind. I mean, it was just every time we went to a different spot, it was total different geography. I didn't anticipate that.
honestly, for me, it was probably Colombia because
oh,
I didn't realize, I thought of it being, it's a border country. I mean, it's an equator country. I thought it would all be hot and warm.
mm-hmm.
I didn't think about the fact that there was the mountains and the snow and the ice in some of the regions of Colombia. So I thought that was really interesting when I was there. I did not bring the proper clothing the first time. Let's put it that way.
We've all done that.
And also,
Mary.
actually, um, I have been going to England every summer for an archaeological dig. And the first time I went, I was really surprised at how cold it was. Now, I mean, I think everything's cold, uh, I mean, it was like in June and July, it was
Mm-hmm.
like 65 degrees some days. It's like I wasn't prepared for the how cool it was in that region.
Which reminds me, we moved to Singapore. We were there for 2 years, and you can hear what the weather's going to be, but until you live it, and you would think 1 degree on the equator is going to be hot, but it was so hot, it never stopped, and even when it rained, it wouldn't cool it down; it would just steam it up. So.
Mm-hmm.
I think I kept anticipating a break, and there was never a break.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I worked in San Francisco for a few years, and because Wendy talking about it, my favorite was I would be in wool suits in the summer, and I would
Mm.
walk around and see the tourist in shorts and brand new San Francisco sweatshirts.
Yes. I
Teddy
was
and
in San
Jack,
Francisco a couple of weeks ago, Linda, so I can relate.
Yep.
Teddy and Jack both have fears, and from past trauma that they need to confront in this novel. Teddy's afraid of heights, and Jack is scared of snakes.
Mm.
Do you have
Mhm.
any fears, rational or irrational, that you need to confront when you are on your journeys?
Hmm.
Yeah,
Heights, always heights, and being on a bus on a narrow road going up a mountain. I hate it. I sit there and I cry. I'm sure I'm gonna die.
I hear you, Peggy. I was in a bus accident when I was traveling in Sri Lanka. Um, oh, 20 years ago now. But every time I get in in a bus when I'm traveling, yeah, I feel it.
Interesting.
I'm not too bad on the heights. I mean, I'm not too bad on buses, but I have a problem with heights, particularly if there's a lot of stairs. And I'll never forget one time when I was in Guatemala, there's a pyramid I wanted to go see, and I was so excited about it. And the stairs going up the side of the pyramid were wooden, and this was in the rainforest. So they were covered with that green, slimy stuff.
Yeah.
So they were slippery, and there were 260 stairs up.
Oh my God.
And I am not good on stairs in the best of times. So I was like really clinging on to both hydrants and getting myself up. When I got to the very top of the stairs, and if you think of this, a pyramid like this, right? Well, there was a little path that went around the top of the pyramid that you would get off the stairs and go. I mean, I'm talking about a path that was about this wide, and it only went to the side of the pyramid, and then in the front it elongated, so there's really a place to stand. But this little narrow space, and you are at an angle, so you can't even hold on to the walls because that wall's tilted way out. And I got to the top, and I was so excited to be there, as little Mayan ladies were, rushing past me and kind of running up, and I was like, I got on the top landing, and I could not move. I could not get on. I could not step onto that side plank. And the guy I was with, he and his son, they're like, "Come on, come on!" I said, "They said it's much wider out here. It's not bad." And I said, "But you have to get there. You have to get across that little space." And I never did go around to the side of the pyramid. I stayed on my little landing, and then after they finished touring around the top of the pyramid, I started walking down with them. But it was. I'm terrified. I don't like heights, and I don't like slippery places with nothing to hold on to.
Yeah. Would I be chucked out of JourneyWoman if I admit that I have sometimes made travel decisions based on how hairy the spiders are?
Oh.
You're from Australia, you
I know, and
need to talk.
that is a problem. Maybe that's why I travel so much. I've got to get away from the spiders.
When it comes to spiders, it's very interesting because if I have a spider in my house, it's got to go. I cannot stand a spider. But when I'm traveling, particularly in like Latin America, in these little villages, spiders, I don't care. It's like it's their house. It's their house too, So it's very different. My perspective of being my house versus when I'm in a different area. Anybody else have a fear that they've had to deal with when they've been on a travel?
I actually didn't know it was a fear until I was in it. And it's because I'm normally not claustrophobic, but I was with friends and we were in the Vatican Museum and we were in one of the rooms that was so crowded that you literally could not move. And I didn't know it was a fear until I'm standing there thinking, and my friend actually has the problem, but I'm like, we can't even move forward to get into a different room.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that's one of the shames about the Vatican, I think, because so many people, it's just so overcrowded, no matter where you go there, and you wait hours and hours in line,
Right.
spend hours and hours shoulder to shoulder with people in rooms. It's
And I guess, I mean, we're all talking about sensory fears and psychological fears and spiders and heights and so on. But I mean, I get as women traveling, and many of us as women traveling alone, I experience a lot of fear quite frequently in my travels, where, I mean, it doesn't stop me from going, but there definitely are times that I am way out of my comfort zone and concerned about safety.
So I was surprised at how, I guess, uncomfortable and distressed I was in London recently when someone pickpocketed my wallet out my backpack. And I felt like very insecure.
I thought I've got no money, I've got no anything because I've got to cancel my credit cards.
Mm-hmm.
And then I learned that if your cards are in your wallet, they always work, even if your plastic is canceled. But I became so neurotic about my phone because so many people told me that they have these phone snatchers and these guys drive along on bikes and grab your phone if you're holding it or talking it. So every time I was going to Google Maps, I was like facing a building and putting myself in a corner and looking around to see. And it made me quite fearful, actually, because I thought if my phone goes, everything's gone.
And I have thought about that because I lost my credit card on a trip just a couple months ago, and it was okay. I had cash and I had a backup card, but it did really make me think. I don't know what happens. Do you remember we read that book about the woman in Morocco a couple of years ago? I think now we read that book about the woman who lost her backpack and it had, you know, everything in it. It had a passport and a wallet and a computer and I don't know what you do. I mean, would you I mean, if you went to the police and said I'm a tourist and I've lost everything, would they at least like find you a place to stay that night? Has anyone been in that situation or know anyone who has? Because you're right, Susan, it can happen so easily, and especially now with our phones, everything's on our phones.
Well, I would suggest that everybody, I mean, in the wallet, I've got all my cards, driving license, everything in there now. So if my backpack gets, I don't know, pickpocketed or whatever, there's backup. And London is a cashless city. So I was just very lucky.
But the problem is if somebody steals your phone and you've got all that information in the wallet and they get into the phone, which these professional thieves can do, I'm sorry to say, then they can charge everything because they can get into your wallet.
I think it's quite hard. I mean, if you report it straight away and say my phone's stolen and they block your phone, I think it's quite hard.
One thing I do when I travel is I have a phone that I only use when I travel. And it's just an inexpensive phone that I can put a SIM card in, and that way I can use it for, you know, to look at maps. I can look up things, but there's none of my personal information on it.
Good idea.
Yeah.
Going back to the story, the Battle of Crete was one of the largest parachute assaults in history.
Wow.
And the evacuation of thousands of Allied soldiers from Crete's southern coast was a significant operation. Had you heard of these about World War II before reading the book?
No.
I hadn't either.
Oh, no. A little bit.
You said you had?
Just a little. Just a little bit. What really shocked me, however, or that I mean, I knew that Greece had a really, really bad time. I mean, really bad time during the war. But I felt so awful that they had kind of tricked them, you know, to thinking that part of the story really bothered me. I felt so bad that they knew that they weren't going to invade there, and yet they had their hopes up and they were all working toward it, and you know they knew that they were going to go to Italy, just, you know, and that was really very disturbing to me. Yeah.
Yeah, Peggy. Oh, you're on mute.
I was really interested to find, as an Australian, because when I was there, I kept on coming across these memorials, these monuments to the Australian soldiers. And I didn't know, as an Australian, I didn't know anything about this history until I read this book, which I read just in the run up to going to Crete. I read it as one of my, you know, kind of prepping for my travel books. And what I found so amazing is that I feel like it's the Australians that should have the monuments to the people from Crete, because when things got rough, the Allied soldiers left. That was that big evacuation from the south of Crete. And it, the local people were helping them get over the mountains and get to the places where the boats were going. And then thousands and thousands and thousands of them got left behind. And those people who were left behind, like Jack and Teddy, they were hidden by the Cretan people, and they were hidden in basements, and they were hidden in caves, and people fed them, and there were massive reprisals from the Nazis when that was ever found out. Like entire villages were massacred. And yet in Crete, they've got these monuments to the Allies, and it just felt to me like the debt of gratitude should be going the other way around.
Peggy, did you have something? You're on mute. No, okay. I'm just wondering, why do you think some battles and wars are more prominent in public awareness than others?
I'd say Hollywood. If Hollywood, two things. One, Hollywood, but also where the people thought. And, the Australians, the British, a lot of people were in Greece. The Americans weren't. And again, Hollywood. And I think it is just where were most people sent. And, that was Western Europe and Japan.
Yep.
So I think all of the, we know about North Africa, but we don't know a lot about North Africa. And I apologize to the Australians. Americans know virtually nothing of Gallipoli in World War I. Yeah. Because we were not a part of it. So it doesn't really hit us. So I really think where people came from and where the battles took place, if you've got a ton of Americans there, the American people are going to put those movies out.
Interesting. Now, Sally, since you're from Australia, did you learn about the history of something like Crete and the Aztec soldiers when you were growing up?
I wasn't born in Australia. I was born in South Africa.
You're in South Africa.
But no. And when I was, I've been in Australia for 17 years now, and I hadn't heard about it. Just last year, I went down to Adelaide for something, and we stopped in a small town, and we were waiting for pizza, and across the road at the kind of retired Veterans League kind of club, and they had some exhibition panels outside, and one of them actually mentioned the Crete battles, but I hadn't, and was kind of a reverse, sort of giving thanks, and actually talked about a subscription, back after the war, where people in Australia did raise money to send to the people of Crete when they needed it. But I wasn't aware of it, no. But it's even in wars today. I mean, we all know what's happening, at least in two major wars, I think, in Ukraine and Israel and Palestine. But I'm sure there are wars happening in many other places in the world right now that I don't know anything.
True.
Oh, we can start with Sudan and go to Ethiopia and Mali.
And it's quite distressing, really, for those people to be. Sorry, Susan, I accidentally spoke over you. I have a bit of a lag.
It's interesting that we really don't know. We only know what's going on in certain places, not in all of them. Now, Alenka uses a wild herb, dittany. It's a wild herb endemic to Crete, which has been known to have healing properties since the time of Aristotle and before. Have you ever used local herbal remedies in your travels, and did they work? Lisa, by the way, is this your first time, Lisa?
Yes, yes.
Well, welcome. And where are you calling in from?
I live in Idaho,
Okay,
in the
welcome.
mountains in Idaho. Yeah, yeah. Thank
Glad
you.
you
I
joined us.
wasn't able to read the book
That's
because
okay.
I just found out the other day, but I'm like, I'm joining anyway.
Yes,
Um,
yes, good. Glad you did.
so I took a with my husband, I had taken a year-long sabbatical and we drove an old beater camper van. This is back in 2007, 2008, from the top of Vancouver Island all the way down to Panama City, Panama and back,
Wow.
and had quite a bunch of adventures en route. But at one point we were getting sick. And so we were trying to, I don't know if you know where David is in Panama.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And then you go up into the mountains and there's like this Swiss enclave. El Boquete is on the other side. At any rate, we were literally, we paid to go see the quetzales at one point, which is like this important bird. And instead, we're there and we're camping underneath like an entire flock of them pooping on our van. At any rate, I was sick. My husband was sick. And I was meeting a caretaker of this property across the road who people were just so lovely. Anyway, he gave me both like an epazote plant, which is like a deworming. I don't know if you guys know it, but it's used a lot in Latin America and it's for deworming for parasites, and then also mint. And so I was traveling in this van and I cut out like a bottom of like a pop container, and I put some rocks in, and then I had like everything. So I was just trying to keep them alive, and I got them all the way. They lived for 6 months. I'd take them out every day, put them in the sun when we stopped, but they were confiscated at the border coming back into the United States because they thought they were marijuana. And I'm like, this is not, this is mint and epazote anyway. They worked. I loved them. So anyway, that was my fun story.
Good. Yeah, Linda.
When I was in Thailand one time, first time I was there, I survived the mosquitoes. The second time I did not. And one of the things we were taught where I was staying was the beauty of Tiger Balm. And, we all, or most of us have heard of Tiger Balm, but did you realize that if you put Tiger Balm on mosquito bites, it helps keep the itching down and that they don't get near as bad?
Mm.
It's a good tip.
Yeah.
I know now.
Mary.
Is it cacao tea or COCA tea for altitude sickness?
Oh,
and
that's coca.
Coca.
Leaves.
You say coca. And I was so I had bad altitude sickness and so drank some of that. And then I looked it up last night and it says it has no proven scientific benefits. So I'm thinking maybe a lot of the things we do are just psychological. But anyway, I don't know if any of y'all have drank the tea when you've had altitude sickness.
Yeah, I drank that tea. I was talking earlier about flying over the Nazca lines, and I was that same day I was drinking that tea. But that was before I realized that a lot of, I can't have regular tea or coffee or cola or anything because I get, or guarana because I get migraines. And yeah, I had the worst migraine after drinking that tea. So yeah, it had the opposite effect for me. But I wonder if it hasn't had scientific proof of it because it hasn't been researched, or if they have tried and it doesn't work, because a lot of people chew that,
Some of the Sherpas and stuff will use it in Nepal, and you see things in Tibet and the like too. So I don't know. They'll give it to people traveling to do mountaineering. So I tend to suspect it actually does. The alkaloids in it are effective, and there's not been the funds to research it, or we haven't researched it.
I'm intrigued now. I'd like to know more.
Now, back to the two guys, Jack and Teddy. Jack knows that Teddy is a terrible example of toxic masculinity, and yet he remains grateful to him for his friendship. Why do you think they share such a tight bond?
Yeah, I found this quite problematic in the book, actually.
Well, didn't he stand up for Jack when they were kids?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was part of it, maybe.
Yeah, I think they had each other's back when they were growing up.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
When I think back to my brother and his best friend, at the time they were about 11 or 12, and they both went to Vietnam. They were both drafted the same day and went to Vietnam. Um, and then they stayed friends through their entire adult lives. But and I think they were very, very different. But I think part of it was what happened is that because the friendship was strong when they were young, and it continued, that and this is what I thought about Teddy and Jack. They were strong friends, and when they were very young, and although they went sort of separate ways and came back, and separate ways and came back, um, that bond of young friendship, when it continues in a friendship, allows you to overlook some things. I also think during that period of time, many men had toxic masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
Jack was the odd one,
Mm-hmm.
not Teddy.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Jack probably had to grow up dealing with and accepting this type of man.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to make allowances for them. Maybe I should, but I don't want to. I don't want to.
Because it was set at a different time, whether we like it or not. Now, after a succession of terrible events, Alenka is almost broken by grief. Eventually, she finds the strength to carry on. Do you think it's true that grief is healed by time?
Mm-hmm.
I think we get stronger with time. I don't know if the grief is healed. And maybe we just get better at managing it.
Yeah.
I saw a graphic once that said, if this is your life and you have grief, and at that moment, the grief takes over everything in your life. But that as time goes on, the grief is still there, but there's more space, life around it, so that that graphic seemed, I kind of like thinking of it that way. Seemed to make sense that it doesn't go away and it doesn't really change. It just, yeah.
As someone who's been widowed for 3 years, that graphic makes a lot of sense. It's sort of like a broken leg, it aches when it rains, it never goes away. It just becomes part of who you are. You are somebody who has grieved intensely, and it's just part of your makeup. And it also changes how you view things, the lens that you see the rest of the world with. It's part of the lens now that wasn't there before. So time makes it easier to makes it easier, but it never goes away. Or I can't foresee it going away at any rate.
Lisa.
So I lost my first husband 25 years ago. And I guess so from I'm sorry for your loss, Peggy, because especially in general, and it's so recent, there's a sense of there being different chapters of our lives, is what it feels like to me. And I was young and we were together for 7 years, 8 years. But it feels like, oh, that was one chapter, right? And then there are other chapters that get written, And so he's like a foundational part of the founding chapter for me, but then there are others. And like you said, there will be certain memories that I go back to that will be with him and only him. And I call it sweet sadness, which is that love and sadness because I had this experience with that person. So anyway, that's been my experience.
Something I've something I've struggled to put words around is, or even to get straight in my head, is I feel like, so I lost my niece a few years ago. She was the other nomad in the family, and she died in an accident when she was in Hanoi in Vietnam.
Mm.
And I feel like I am a different person now than I was then. And that grief is part of the reason I'm a different person. Grief is formative, you know, it has such a massive impact on us. But I do love who I am now. So you have this, well, I have this strange thing where, I mean, obviously I would do anything for that not to have happened.
Mhm.
But if it hadn't happened, I wouldn't be the person I am now. So you have this joy in yourself and who you are as a person. And I don't, as I said, I don't really know how to fit the words around that. There's almost a I don't know. I feel like anything I say will kind of belittle the loss, but there's a gratitude for who I have become that I owe to her. And that does coexist with grief in a strange way.
Beautiful.
So
Hmm.
I
Well, I
just
hate to
published
I
a
hate
book
to end this
called
on a
Travels with My Grief. And
Hmm.
it's all about how I went to India. I got a job offer in India. And I went there after my husband passed away from London. And the travel was like up and down. Some of it was very tough, being a widow in India, working in a big conglomerate. And, you know, I just endorse what you say, the ups and downs and the memories, they just like smash you.
Smash you.
Well, ladies, I hate to do this. I hate to end on such a sorrowful. I like the sweet sadness that you talked about. No, but our time is coming to an end. We Next year we have already listed all the books that Sally said she was going to post. Did you post that, Sally?
Yes, so I have I've dropped a link
That
into the chat, which has got our
chat.
next 6 books. So next year we'll have books every second month. And the next one is After Story by Larissa Barrett. She's a very impressive person, the author. She is an Aboriginal activist in Australia. And the book actually straddles Australia and England. It's about traveling with her mother. It's a novel, it's fiction, traveling with her mother on a tour of England's most revered literary sites. So it's a really interesting mix of things happening in that book.
Yeah, we decided that every 3 months was not that wasn't fulfilling to us.
Yeah,
So
thank you.
Thanks.
So we
Yay.
went to every other month. There's some of us that would still like to do every month, but every other month at least is a much better, than once every 3 months. So hopefully we can get back into a good cadence again.
Thank you.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
We'll
you.
see you in a couple
Good to
months.
see you.
And happy
Bye.
Thanksgiving for U.S. people. Merry Christmas for those who celebrate Christmas.
Oh,
See you
yes.
next year.
Yes, happy
Happy
Christmas.
holidays.
Yeah.
Happy Thanksgiving for next week for the Americans.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.